Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. It's time to recap the tier list for May 2025. TLDR, it's almost like doing research helps you come to more correct conclusions. Who knew? Onosato. The brand spanking new Yokozuna put on the S-iest S-tier performance, damn near running the table and guaranteeing himself no worse than a playoff after just 12 days. It's the best run we've seen since Kotozakura's 14-1 Yusho in November, but more importantly, it's the first such performance we've seen in years from anyone in the sport who we're expecting to do it again and again without sitting out multiple bashos in between. Right now, the question isn't which Yokozuna is gonna be better, but whether Hoshoryu can keep from being a footnote in Onosato's history. Hoshoryu's next, of course. The top wrestler by rank was the second best wrestler in May, and you'd have better luck finding pigeons with teeth than someone surprised by that outcome. The cries about another potential Kyujo hit maximum volume after the prodigal nephew fell to 2-2, but apparently everyone forgot good Oho is pretty tough, and Abi, for Hoshoryu, is like two Hakuhos duct taped together. This is the Yokozuna we were always likely to get. Imperfect, but still very good. Hopefully everyone can live with that. Let's take a run through the injured wrestlers by starting with Takayasu. Papa Bear was busted up arguably from day one when he clearly couldn't apply the power we should expect against a Tamawashi he'd beaten 4 straight and was moving slowly after the Onosato match on day 2. His basho was like watching a sandcastle deteriorate in the tide. I can't say I expected him to look this bad in a basho where he made it through all 15 days, but this is the Takayasu we got used to seeing before March. We can't forget that the one we saw in March may indeed only show up once a year at best. Shishi, C+ prediction, but man, what a mess. I saw a comment from someone unhappy I'd predicted Shishi to do pretty well, and I can't blame him, but Shishi was obviously hurt. His upper left leg was significantly bandaged early on, and he just kinda fell down multiple times during the tournament. This from a guy who started to improve once he began solidifying his footwork and who started making a name for himself surviving in scrambles. It's fair if you think our initial grade of C+ was optimistic, but this utter shit show happened in large part because he was a wounded lion fighting. We'll have to wait for him to get back here to see if he can really hold up outside the bottom of the division. Kota Shoho. For a guy who missed the first 5 days, he came awfully close to a Kachikoshi. Sure, his schedule wasn't too tough relative to his skill level, and once the opposition toughened up, he fell off from 6-1 to 6-4. But he also looked like his leg was getting to him near the end, starting with the Shona Naomi fight. He did the best he could, and I suspect he'll have a strong performance in July as long as he lets his leg fully heal. Okay, let's get back to the reasonably healthy guys. Aonishiki. 11 wins bumps him to A tier, but this is pretty much what we expected, right? The tricky thing with more inexperienced wrestlers is that it can be harder to tell what you'll get, but Aonishiki showed up as just about the most predictable top guy in the game, non-Onosato division. Losing to Kinbozan should only have been a surprise to those who didn't see how decisively Kinbo Slice won their first matchup. Running the Maegashira table all the way into some Sanyaku matchups was no shock, and neither were his struggles with the cream of the division. However, the absolute disaster from Maegashira 1 through 5 should yeet him all the way to Komusubi, and if Kinbozan could run through him like that, I suspect he's gonna finish July with a footprint on each butt cheek. Onokatsu. And let's talk about Hakuoho as well, because what a difference a rank makes. Hakuoho's blazing hot start, of course, was what landed him in Sanyaku matchups on day 10, while Onokatsu's 3 and 4 struggle left him plugging away at the middle of the division. But once Hakuoho's blistering schedule and Onokatsu's very beatable one left him with equivalent 8-4 records, Hakuoho was the one who got dragged back up to the Sanyaku because they needed to feed Kirishima an arguably worthy opponent on day 14, while Onokatsu got to pound on Atami Fuji down at rank 12. Understand, this decision had nothing to do with the scheduling committee's perception of the wrestlers. When the bottom of the joy is a disaster and they look down the ranks for someone to face a Sanyaku wrestler, they take the highest ranked acceptable opponent. Kirishima had just fought Oshoma, so Hakuoho was next. And because the basho was decided after day 13, they could schedule in whatever way they felt was suitable instead of being compelled to create matchups appropriate for a Yusho race. Hakuoho hopefully learned a good lesson on the final day about not trusting the refs to call a false start, but at least he had his winning record wrapped up. On to the incorrect B tiers going down, and let's start with Tobizaru. 7 and 8, but close to Akachi Koshi moves him to C+. Tobi was obviously in a position where he had some tough matches with Hakuoho, Onokatsu, and Aonishiki staring him down, and he did lose all 3. That wasn't too surprising. He did seem to slow down during the Basho though, and his leg was bandaged, so he may have been dealing with an injury. Still, he had a chance to hit 8 wins on the final day, but got screwed into fighting Wakataka Kage because everyone above him mega failed so hard. In retrospect, he was a little risky for a B tier pick, but the biggest takeaway is that he really isn't moving quite like he used to. Takeru Fuji. Yeah, alright, this was straight up wrong, but it's worth talking about how it all played out. Remember, he started 3-0 before everything fell apart, which coincided with the start of his Sanyaku schedule. And for someone who's expected to eventually be in the Sanyaku, he's unbelievably ass against them. He's got 5 tournaments in the top division, including that March 2024 debut. In that time, he's 7-19 against anyone who's been in the Sanyaku during that time, and 41-8 against anyone who hasn't. But the difference is even wilder than that. Those records include a 4-2 mark against Sanyaku level opponents during his Yusho run. That means, since his return from injury, he's 3-17 against them, including just 1-9 this time around. Even so, predicting a winning record for him wasn't based on the assumption he'd do well against this group, but just going 2-5 against the Sanyaku proper would have landed him 8 wins. 0-7 though? At this point, fans need to hope he hasn't replaced his brain with more muscle, because he's gotta figure out some new tactics. Koto Sakura. Well, he's pretty much who he is right now. The only surprising result was his first loss to Gonoyama in 8 fights, but the way that match went, the real surprise is that Gonoyama hadn't found a way to beat him before now. He was safely Kachikoshi after day 12, and at no point a threat to win the Basho. And unlike Kirishima, he doesn't seem like he's gonna swing from great to disastrous. Welcome to the world of the static Ozeki. Daisho, Wakataka Kage, and Wakamoto Haru. What did I say before the Basho? At least 2 would score winning records with a good chance of it being all 3. And between them, they averaged almost 10 wins, which would normally mean they were all safely Kachikoshi. The spread between them, though, was pretty bananas. Daisho's 10 wins bumps him up to B tier, but he was pretty much regular old consistent Daisho this Basho. At Seiwake East, the number 4 guy, his starting schedule is easier than the finish, and he absolutely sprinted out of the gate. He got caught up by Hiroda Umi's insta slapdown on day 6, then Wakataka Kage and an always problematic Tamawashi dropped him to 6-3. This was just the right situation for him to become the testing ground for the new young guns, with the top 3 looming afterwards, and suddenly it looked like the Basho could go all wrong. But as it turned out, none of the kids had the game to even stress him all that much. Once he was 9-3, alright, he lost to who are now the 2 Yokozuna, then beat the staggering Koto Sakura to finish with 10 wins. And this is why the dude's not making Ozeki. 10-5 included 1 loss to a sneaky move, and 4 that were totally unsurprising. If Koto falls apart to where Daisho can beat him consistently, maybe those Ozeki odds creep above 0, but now he's got the newer guys busy figuring him out too. He still just doesn't have enough consistently beatable guys around him to get there. And that's if we treat Wakataka Kage as a coin flip fight, even though he was anything but a coin flip in May. Waka's 12 wins is S tier by the numbers, but let's be clear, for a Komusubi who was excelling, he got softballed big time at the end. That's not his fault, of course. Oshoma and Asakuryu simply made the most sense as contenders who needed testing, and with the Yusho decided after that, he got to fight the highest ranked guys who didn't yet have 8 losses. Part of the reason that's a softball schedule, though, is because he's that good. He lost to the top 2, and the fact he'll probably continue to do so is the main reason it's hard to envision a real Ozeki run. He needs almost nothing else to go wrong, and how can you count on that when Abi exists? And finally, poor Wakadu. The life of a Maegashira 1 East is hard. He ate the whole Sanyaku schedule in the first 6 days with only 1 win to show for it. If Takayasu had been healthy, it might have been 0, but that's why he's a pretty good pick. Like his brother, in this position, he can often turn it around massively on everyone below him. And he was in the middle of doing just that when Takerufuji finally figured something out, which, yeah, I think we can all understand him looking frustrated after that. But the Oshoma fight was really the stunner. If Oshoma hadn't been battling for a Sanyaku spot, I don't know if Waka loses there. Still, he'll be at Maegashira 1 again, and if it's West Side, maybe he can enjoy another 9-6 record not getting him back to Komusubi. Oshoma. For the vast majority of wrestlers, making sure they get at least 8 wins in a basho is the most consistent goal they have. It's a fairly big deal once they hit the mark, but I can't remember a quieter run to an early Kachikoshi than Oshoma had this basho. I'm sure the lack of attention was largely due to starting 2 and 3, with his only wins over Chiyoshoma and Ura, neither of whom won for the first 4 days. But then a string of favorable matchups came his way, and lo and behold, 6 straight wins left him safe with 4 more days to add to the total. He got a little bit screwed in my view by the fact he was scheduled against Waka Takakage before his 8th win was secured. Then after dropping matches to Waka and Kirishima, with Wakamoto Haru up next, it looked like he would have to settle for a small promotion. But in a move after my own heart, Oshoma looked like an extremely motivated mercenary told how much his pay would go up if he could just win 2 more battles. That fight against Abi, when the situation had unfolded so he was effectively guaranteed Komusubi with a win? I can't remember a fight that felt so different in level of effort from what we usually see to what we got that time. It's a big deal for him, and congratulations on the achievement, but his reward is going to be becoming the first one stacked in the dead pile in July. Roga. Oh boy, this one felt good. If I hadn't done my research, I would not have expected Roga to blast off from the start, so watching him live up to expectations was great. Even losing a normally dominant matchup against Toki Hayate wasn't enough to derail him. What did almost derail him though was having that 7-3 start run him into first-time matchups against Red Hot Asakoryu and the simply better Meisei, as well as a match with an Onokatsu who's a hell of a lot better than the last time they fought. Fortunately, the schedule balanced out near the end and let him ride out a 9-6 finish. But you look at what happened with him and with Hakuoho, and those are examples of what I mean when I talk about the schedule tending to balance out a guy's final record even if he starts out surprisingly well or surprisingly poorly. Takano Sho. Veteran Rikishi performs exactly as years of observation indicate he should. News at 11. I know that sometimes it seems like wrestlers blow up our expectations at every turn, but really, performances like Takano Sho's this basho are much more the norm. He beat everyone who should reasonably be at a disadvantage against him and lost to everyone capable of putting up a real challenge. I know Shodai may not seem like he's in that latter group anymore, but this is his 2nd straight win against Takano Sho despite his overall struggles, so for the moment it seems like he's got something figured out. The downside is that Takano Sho was 8-7 despite Midori Fuji being the only single-digit rank opponent he had for 13 days, at which point he basically ran out of double digits to fight. He also wasn't moving as well as the highly competitive version of him we've seen a couple times in the last year. I'll never fully bet against his ability to put it all together at these low-ish ranks, but this is also the most likely Takano Sho we'll see in any given basho. Finishing our C+ recap is a rock-solid basho from Meisei. He looks reasonably healthy, has a lot of veteran experience to lean on, but isn't the kind of athlete that can compete against the top of the pops anymore. Lo and behold, he won his highly favorable matchups, split the coin flips, and lost the tough ones except against Churinaumi, who was having a time of it the whole 2 weeks. He's surprisingly effective against Hakuoho and won new matchups against Roga and Kaio, which put him a little more on the upside of his range. But for Maegashira 10, he should stay around the mid-ranks, and thus July will probably land him in C+ again. Hitting the C- picks, Asakoryu and Sadanaumi. These are the 2 guys I arguably got the most wrong, at least in terms of underestimating them. But they are the 2 guys I couldn't be happier to see prove me wrong. I think this is the 3rd straight basho I've said I'd be happy to see Asakoryu outperform my expectations, and this time it finally happened. The potential of his matchups was clear, but for him to not have a single surprising loss and then add wins in new matchups against Nishikigi and Roga was pretty much a maximum high roll for his results. He was a little fortunate that a later matchup against Tatami Fuji happened to pit him against a wrestler he's had success against in the past, but there was nothing lucky about reaching 8 wins in 11 days. But we won't talk about what's likely for July just yet. Sada Naumi's route to success was a little less by the numbers. He lost to Roga in a matchup where he's usually strong, but Roga's recent success made that less than surprising. But he found a way to win every matchup that tends to go back and forth, and added in his first win against Meisei after 4 straight losses and almost 2.5 years. Part of the error in this pick came from the fact he fought all the way down to the bottom of the division and hardly at all above his rank, which is a little unusual this far above the bottom. Usually someone in his position will fight most of that group, but not everyone. In this case, it only took 11 days for him to fight everybody from rank 12 down except Kota Shoho. But now I know I may need to take more of those fights into account next time. Kinbozan. The other overachiever wound up in a situation similar to what he had in March, with a relatively easy schedule that involved mostly fighting guys lower in rank than him. This time though, Kinbo Slice actually did what he was supposed to do with this level of opposition. I think what we're seeing with him, and maybe I'm just late to the party on this one, is that more than being even good or bad, he's streaky. I don't know if it's Shodai style giving up when he's frustrated or just getting out of sync, but we pretty often see strong first halves lead to strong second halves and vice versa, or middling first halves leading to middling second halves. Given that he'll be at a career high rank in July and taking his first trip to Joy Hell, it's probably gonna go all sideways. If he can pull some surprises early though, maybe he won't be utterly doomed. Now into the more expected low tier performances, starting with Oho. So was this an Oho Basho or was it the most Oho Basho? It always bears remembering that if the first few days of a Basho go well against a prediction, that doesn't mean the prediction will turn out wrong. 15 days is a long time. But it's hard to deny that watching Oho rip off 3 straight to start over Koto Zakura, Kirishima, and Hoshoryu no less made it look like this pick might be a disaster. There were a lot of tough matchups coming and he lost all of those, but after that start, I certainly didn't expect he'd also lose all the coin flips. I feel for the guy, running through the sport's best non-Onosato division and then collapsing so hard that a winning record is never in sight has to be an awful experience. But that, in a nutshell, is the Oho experience. Midori Fuji. It's a pretty sad state of affairs when a guy is over halfway through his basho and your kindest observation is, at least he doesn't look as bad as Terutsuyoshi. He was fighting hard and didn't look like anything was causing him physical problems, just nothing worked at all. But as it turns out, the first 8 matchups were all potential landmines. Each one of those losses was at least the second straight to that opponent. Then Tobizaru got him, who he usually does well against, but Tobi's good and Midori must have wondered if he had forgotten how to wrestle. After that though, all the matchups turned around and so did his results. The only bad head-to-head he had the rest of the way was against Shona Naomi, and that just doesn't matter anymore. So as ridiculous as that pair of streaks was, given the competition, it's not actually that surprising. Shodai. If you asked me for a specific win total for Shodai before the Basho, it would have been 7. And the difference between 7 and the 6 he had was his first loss in 8 matches against Chiyoshoma. At least he pulled it together enough to finish with 3 wins against guys who shouldn't be able to compete with even this version of the Dark Lord. Toki Hayate. As anticipated, this started out rough for good old Time Storm. He managed a great win in a tough matchup with Roga, but traded that off with an unexpected loss to Ryuden. Losing to Tamashoho the day after the Ryuden fight was just salt in the wound. On the plus side, those early struggles helped him land fights with the wounded Shishi and badly struggling Chura Naomi and Shona Naomi, but once he lost to Nishikigi with Onokatsu on deck, a losing record seemed inevitable. Even reaching 7-7 against the wounded Endo didn't seem like it would change that with Hakuoho on deck. But then the Gyoji and the head judge both put their hands in their pockets, an especially impressive feat given their lack of pockets, and Toki got away with a pretty clear false start against Hakuoho. Hachikoshi secured, but I would not want to be standing across from the kid again in July. Kaio! Anyone get the feeling Fat Tohakuryu might rival Shodai for unpredictable results? He largely leans on pushing and retreating, and his results can swing massively depending on if his timing is good or not. But where Tohakuryu does that because he's one of the smallest Sekitori, Kaio's a big boy. Why is backpedal fighting so enticing to him? And more to the point, how is he able to take a terrible start and nearly spin it to gold? Ichi Yamamoto drops to D tier, as does Chiyoshoma, aka less competitive Ichi Yamamoto. They've been linked all year, rising to unexpected heights in January, with Chiyo bouncing up and down a bit after that while Ichi slid into the bottom of the joy and hung out there, but eventually something had to rug pull him. For Ichi, it was the Sanyaku coming around and turning a decent 4-4 start into a hellscape. Chiyo's basho fell apart earlier, with the mid-ranks looking almost as difficult this time around. Never underestimate the power of someone being unfamiliar with how you fight, and never underestimate what can happen when they figure it out. Shura no Umi. Shura's basho was like an unluckier version of Midori Fuji's. He had 5 rock-solid matchups, lost to Meisei, and won the other 4. All the rest of those losses though? Onokatsu, Aonishiki, 7 guys who he's now lost to at least twice straight, and somehow Shonen no Umi. Looking back to his 10-5 at the exact same rank in September, he won a lot of matches against guys he'd done poorly against in the past. I definitely should have seen this earlier, but I see it now. He may be well set up to succeed near the bottom of the division, but once he hits the single digits, he needs to overachieve to do work. Tochi Taikai. I gave Tochi an outside shot at a winning record because he had a couple good matchups coming in and was surrounded by veterans of questionable physical health. And he started strong, going 3-1, with the only loss being an expected one to Asakoryu. But all the veterans he needed to fall apart declined to do so, or at least not in time for their match, and the rest of the tournament was an unmitigated disaster. I suspect he and Tamashoho are going to end up being rivals for who can hang around the bottom of Makuuchi the longest, but at least Tochi still has enough room to grow that maybe he can become a division regular. The trip back to Juryo should be good for him though. We begin the C injury tier group with a guy who clearly is not C level, Kirishima. Yeah, that whole "this is the actual Kirishima now" looks like Kirishima's upside is in fact still pretty far up. The thing that always leaves the potential for this type of performance, whether or not we think it's coming, is that he's proven to be competitive against everyone except Onosato. What gets in the way when gauging his likely performance is that said competitiveness largely came before he got all banged up. Add in the report of a new injury just a couple weeks before the basho started, and it was hard to believe even a recovered Kiri would perform at quite this level. Getting to skip the Onosato fight was a major plus, of course, but even if that had happened in place of the Oshoma fight, he'd still have finished with double-digit wins. At this point, what I wonder is if his body will ever find a consistent baseline, or if he'll be a less swingy version of Takayasu. Abi. Okay, this was Abi's basho. He lost his first 3 to Daieisho, Kotozakura, and Onosato. Fine, no shame, no surprise. He beats Hoshoryu to get off the slide, but it's his 5th straight win against the Yokozuna, so not necessarily indicative of a turnaround. But then he blasts his way to 7-4, beating Takeru Fuji and Oho, neither of whom looked as bad at the time as things turned out by the end, Wakataka Kage, who is absolutely rolling, and Wakamoto Haru, who's taken him out behind the woodshed repeatedly over the last year. Yet another trip to the Sanyaku was within sight, but somehow he managed to lose 4 straight to finish. I grant that 3 of them were traditionally tough matchups, and Oshoma was a new face across the ring, but Abi is the emperor of getting a win when it looks like he shouldn't be able to get it. What's wild is that the same thing happened to him in January, 7-4 to 7-8, despite the entire rest of his career consisting of bashos where he either got over the line or never had a chance. And yet that crash out gave him exactly the expected finish. Crazy. Atami Fuji. Atami almost pulled a super Abi, dropping from 7-3 to 7-7 before squeaking out his winning record on the last day. It's weird to think that this might be his level now, but his early losses were to 2 problematic opponents and a Shonen no Umi showing signs of life, if not competence. But once his excellent start dropped him in among the other strong performers, he got big clapped. We might see a fair bit of this in the near future. A strong start against lesser competition, followed by a fall off against higher performers just as his body starts to collapse at the end of the tournament. And Endo. Another hot start into apparent concussion into hanging on for dear life for Endo. I know it wasn't clear in March what exactly his injury was. Maybe concussion, maybe a back injury, maybe both, who knows. But now it's hard to think there wasn't a concussion involved when he looked just as slow to get up at the end of matches after his first big crash out in May. Concussions are one of the easiest injuries to get again if there wasn't enough recovery time after the first one. He didn't seem as messed up as in March, at least not to where he barely seemed to know where he was all the way to the end, but I remain more concerned about his health than his results. And now ye olde D tier. For some reason when we nail a tier, this is the one, and hot damn did we call it this time. Ura! This basho lived up to the worst version of the disaster it seemed was en route from the start. What's even worse was that his 2-8 start got him out of several Sanyaku matchups. Had he done better, taken longer to reach 8 losses, he may well have had to fight those fights and wound up with almost as bad a result. But we'll always have the Uratanage. Gonoyama, Tamawashi, and Hiradeumi. As anticipated, these Joy Bros never had a chance. Tamawashi was Makekoshi on day 10, Gonoyama on day 11. Hiradeumi only held it off for longer by hitting sneaky instant slapdowns on Ichi Yamamoto and Daisho, who are normally very troublesome matchups for him. But clinging to hope just meant he didn't get to skip Wakataka Kage, so a winning record was never really in the cards for him either. On the plus side, these disaster cases should drop into easier territory for July. On the downside, they're being replaced by guys like Hakuoho, Onokatsu, and Aonishiki, so making it back up will be that much tougher, and if they make it, that much more difficult to stay in those upper ranks. Ryuden! Tamashoho. Up and down and round the coffee shop manager goes. I suspect we'll keep seeing this from Tamashoho. He gets the benefit of seeing tougher competition every time he comes up, takes that experience back to Juryo, then returns to Makuuchi and gets beat up again because he's not quite the wrestler he needs to be to stick around. But we'll always have best wishes here for the most normal looking dude in the sport. And finally, the guys no longer worth stressing over are probably not going to be on the next tier list. Nishikigi pulled a reverse Midori Fuji, but much like Midori, the outcome was more explicable than it originally seemed. He's been so hit and miss that it looked like he's still nearly impossible to predict. Looking at his schedule in full though, it looks like he might just be at a certain level, and that level isn't enough for most of his competition, even at the bottom of Makuuchi. His 5-0 start was built off Shonen Umi, who he wrecks, Ryuden, who he's beaten 3 straight, 2 guys brand new to the division, and 1 genuine Juryo scrub. Once the competition got even Tamashoho level legit, it was over. He's probably 1-8-7 record from returning, but he should be in Juryo come July. And Shonen Umi. I've gone from being frustrated to just sad for him. Before this point, either he fought well or he looked dead. This time, he was trying his best from the start. I felt like we saw actual effort from him basically all 15 days. He just couldn't get it done. I give him credit for trying to fight through his problems, and he beat Atami Fuji for only the second time in 7 fights. But Atami's got his own problems, and Shonen Umi lost 5 matches where he's been the superior wrestler overall. This is the kind of fate it's hard to imagine him coming back from, at least anywhere near the level he showed at his best. Never say never, but we can definitely say oof. And that is the tier list recap for May 2025. Definitely went better than the last couple, at least in terms of who would score winning records and who wouldn't, so it looks like the new method works pretty well. Something bananas can always happen, but with a little refinement, hey, these might turn out to be consistently good. Anyway, did you have any predictions that gave you particular pride or terrible shame? Let me know in the comments. Other than that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.